Hi everyone. So, in our introduction discussion post, I mentioned how I had some knowledge of the history of student affairs and its role in higher education. In my last class, we studied a segment on student affairs and learned that the term student affairs didn't even exist until the late 1960s and through the 70s. In fact, there was no designated personnel for this area until the early 20th century. So, who tended to the development and the needs of the students? In the early days of higher education, who could have had the capacity to fulfill these duties as the student population slowly evolved? Education was not just for the elite anymore, as now even a farmer's son could attend college if his family could afford it. This diversity on campus also introduced a shift in the culture of campus life, which also influenced the behaviors of students. Social and political trends also carried their own influence. These changes left administrators with the question of how they can keep students disciplined outside of the classroom. Carpenter et al. 2016 mentions that this led to institutions incorporated a philosophy of in loco parentis, which can be translated to in place of the parent. Tutors and professors, on occasion, would fill these roles and create guidelines for how students should conduct themselves outside of the classroom. However, the influence of in loco parentis would not last forever, as faculty began to become inspired by the German higher education system. This system encouraged faculty to keep their focus on the intellect of the student, as well as advancing their own research. This in turn left a looser grip on the faculty's desire to attend to the needs of students outside of the classroom. It is at this moment that institutions in the U.S. will take a step back and reflect on better ways to lead the students. Carpenter et al. 2016 explains how this led to the creation of personnel like the Dean of Men and the Dean of Women, who would fill those parental roles but with a more professional approach. According to a chronological analysis done by Wilson et al. 2006, it wasn't until 1937 that the student personnel point of view began to put a major focus on considering students from a holistic perspective. This included a student's intellectual capacity and achievement, emotional makeup, physical condition, social relationships, vocational aptitudes and skills, moral and religious values, economic resources, and aesthetic appreciation. A balance of all those characteristics was thought to be essential to student success, and was the responsibility of the personnel to ensure that this happened. While watching the assigned video material, the speaker discusses another important shift in both student personnel and higher education that occurred in 1949 in the aftermath of World War II. For instance, the introduction of what we know as financial aid will begin, which opened doors for mass higher education. Regarding the student personnel, the mission and some of the goals remain the same. But now personnel would like to challenge students to take charge of their own development in a more proactive way. Instead of placing the destiny of students onto the personnel, they would encourage accountability among the students. During this time, the influence of scientific research will also aid in collecting data on students that could be used to gauge the needs and the kinds of resources that students would need. Another important shift in student affairs occurred in the 1980s. In 1986, the introduction of the Professional Book of Standards for Higher Education, also known as CAS, served as a guideline for how institutions should serve their students. According to Whistling et al. 2006, in 1986, a statement was presented by NASPA in honor of the 50th anniversary of the student personnel point of view. And this statement not only served to define the roles and purposes of student affairs, but it also noted that personnel must remember that every student is unique and worthy of support in some way. In addition to the understanding that each student should be treated as an individual, the language in the 1986 iteration appeared to be a balance between 1937 and 1949 regarding the beliefs and values, so that makes me believe that things were working well for student affairs. But those in the profession remain humble enough to keep the effort consistent while monitoring areas that could be improved upon. Shifting to the second part of the discussion, if there was anything that I could add or modify with these iterations, it would include more perspectives and goals relative to diversity and inclusion in mental health initiatives. This is something that every institution is currently facing. We're working on to improve, and these matters affect higher education on several levels. We cannot sustain or advance our institutions if we're not doing our best to ensure that everyone is represented and supported. Thank you for watching.